Hey everybody, it's Crypto-Anarchist here, and I'm bringing you guys another video on cryptocurrencies. And today we're going to be talking about the blockchain latency and propagation argument that it's been circulating around recently. It's a reason that people are saying that big blocks don't work, and there's a reason why you can't have big blocks in blockchains. They tried to say that they were explaining this easily. The people who made this paper, the BioXroot Labs, and they really screwed up a lot of things here. It's a better argument than most people make against big blockchains, but it's still not very good. So let's just go over what they talk about here. The first thing that I want to point out is that immediately, like one of the first things that they say, this is the second, third, and fourth paragraphs, is they start talking about Bitcoin as though it's a mesh. Bitcoin is not a mesh. Miners do not send blocks only to 8 or 10 of their peers. The only people who are connected to only 8 or 10 peers are non-mining nodes. So it gets really old when, everyone keeps saying Bitcoin's a mesh, Bitcoin's a mesh. It's not a mesh. So the math on all of this that's going to follow that they do here, it's completely off, because if you're only sending, the block that you propagate to 8 or 10 other miners, obviously, it takes a lot of hops to get to everybody on the network, but that's not the way that Bitcoin works. It's never worked like that. So it just gets old when people start talking about this. Going a little bit further, though, this one I found kind of hilarious as well. They talk about here about current node propagation speeds, and they say as of right now, the average link speed in the Bitcoin network is 60 megabytes per second, okay? 60 megabytes per second. Why on earth they think this is going to remain constant, I don't know. This really makes no sense. And you might say, 60 megabyte per second link doesn't seem like that much, but it says right here they can propagate a block in about 0.13 seconds, so a little over a tenth of a second. So that's, you got to understand, like, if you're propagating a block in a little over a tenth of a second, that's not a long time. So it's not something that you really have to work to improve upon, or if you work to improve upon it a lot, it's not going to save you that much money, okay? This goes back to this old argument that people have had since the 70s, where they're like, oh, back in the 70s, they're like, we only have 10 years worth of oil left in the ground that we know about. We're going to run out of it in 10 years. No, it's just the fact that as far as oil is concerned, if you produce oil, you only look for enough supplies to last you for the next few years, and then, like, if you've got an entire decade's worth of oil supplies that you know about, you don't really look that hard for the rest of the oil that exists in the world, because you've got enough to last you for a very long time. If you produce oil, if you've got 10 years worth of work, that's a lot of work ahead of you, so that's enough, okay? So just like in this case, like, you can obviously get links that are a lot faster than 60 megabytes per second. I don't know why, like, when they do the math here, this BioXroot Labs, they pretend that that's all the faster you can go is 60 megabytes per second. I don't know why on earth, I would assume they're respected. They call themselves a lab as though, they're supposed to be scientists. That was pretty poor science that you guys did right there. Pretty poor. But beyond just their mistakes, let's actually talk about trying to solve this problem using the tools that Bitcoin Cash will be using. First thing you got to understand about Bitcoin Cash is they're going to be implementing graphene. Now, graphene is something I talked about a long time ago. This was actually, I think, before I was really an advocate of Bitcoin Cash, and during that time, I was just talking about how graphene would help the average non-mining node. And so what I said about graphene is that with graphene, you just don't re-download transactions that you've already seen in the mempool. All you do is download transactions in a block that you haven't already seen in the mempool. So though this doesn't really, like, for your total, the amount of work that your node does, it only cuts it in half. The way that, or the reason why graphene is such a big issue for propagation is because it cuts down the amount of work that you have to do for propagation by more than 3 orders of magnitude. And the way you figure this out is just, you think about it logically, okay? So how long does it take for a message to circumnavigate the globe? About 500 milliseconds, right? So if you're a miner, and you're using graphene and you're downloading a new block, the only transactions that you need to download in this new block are transactions that you have not seen in the mempool. And since it only takes 500 milliseconds for a transaction to go completely around the globe. If you're a miner, so long as you wait a quarter of a second, then that means that you've gotten all transactions throughout the globe, because obviously the farthest away any transaction can be is the other side of Earth. That's halfway around the Earth. So it only takes 250 milliseconds for a transaction to halfway circumnavigate the globe, to go halfway around the Earth. Okay, so if it takes a quarter of a second, or the only transactions that you will not have are those transactions that were done within the last quarter of a second. And technically speaking, it's actually, you'll have more transactions than that, because you, like, obviously if you know, a transaction was sent and that transaction was sent, like, you know, 10 miles away from where your node is, obviously you'll get that transaction before that quarter of a millisecond occurs. So we're actually doing the math to make it worse for Bitcoin Cash here. But basically, once you implement graphene, the only transactions that will actually propagate with that miner's block, it's only 1 out of every 2,400. Okay, so obviously this means that with graphene you can scale 2,400 times larger than the network is right now, and you don't have to switch anything else, and you won't have any more problems. And again, remember that 2,400 number is actually low. Like, you could actually, it's probably closer to like 4,000 to 5,000 times larger. It could even be higher than that. I'm not entirely sure. That's a more complicated problem, and I don't have access to statistics for that. But again, with graphene, the only transactions that propagate with the block are the transactions that the miner has not seen in the mempool, and the only transactions that the miner has not seen in the mempool are the transactions that have occurred in the last few milliseconds. And again, there's 600 seconds in a block, so if you're only looking at the last quarter of a millisecond worth of transactions, that means you only have to propagate, or your node only has to read 1 out of 2,400 transactions. Okay, and again, I made that math work even worse for Bitcoin Cash, but obviously you can see right now that if we use this math right here, then with just graphene alone, not changing anything else about Bitcoin Cash, you can already have 2.5 gigabyte block sizes, and you're not really going to have problems. It's probably closer to 5 to 10 gigabyte block sizes, and you won't have problems. So that's a huge improvement, okay? And these guys, I don't know, they talk later on about how you can't even get 300 megabytes. It's like, I just showed you with graphene, you can get, 2.5 to 10 gigabyte block sizes, and it's not going to fucking matter. The second thing you got to remember is that, they said the average Bitcoin node connection is 60 megabytes per second. Well, you can very easily get 100 gigabytes per second. That's not even that hard for big businesses through optical fiber cables. So if you get 100 gigabytes per second, and again, I said you could get around 2,500 transactions per second before, or only with graphene, you can get 2,500 times larger blocks and not have a propagation issue. So if you're going from 60 megabytes per second to 100 gigabytes per second, that's like 166. Oh wait, no. If you're going from 60 megabytes per second, that's 1,667 times larger. 100 gigabytes is 1,667 times larger than 60 megabytes per second. I do believe. I just did that math on the top of my head, so hopefully that works out. I don't really know. I think it's pretty close though. But if you look at that, then you're already at terabyte block sizes. And I say almost possible, but if you do the math there, I mean, it is possible. Okay, so if you use higher end optical fiber cables and graphene, we can already do terabyte block size propagation, and it's not an issue. I don't know, sometimes these arguments that these people make, it doesn't make any sense to me. And again, if you don't understand what is coming out with graphene, and you don't understand that current propagation speeds aren't constant, I can understand how you can make this issue, or you can make this mistake, but I don't know. Sometimes this stuff just sort of embarrasses me. The final thing that I want to talk about though too is, even if let's say you need block sizes that are more than terabytes, maybe you need them exabyte size, or petabyte size. I'm not even sure what the biggest number is there. I think exabytes and petabytes are bigger. But anyways, let's say you have these huge ass block sizes, and it does take something like 10 to 30 seconds for your block to propagate, which would be a massive failure for Bitcoin all around, because that's not supposed to be the way that it works. But even if you do this, there's something called header first mining, okay? So when you're a miner, you do not need all the transactions to start mining on the next block. You need all the transactions to start mining on the next block to get the fees in the next block. So like if you only have the header and you don't have all the transactions downloaded for the next block, you just start mining on the header. You can find the next block, but you won't be able to include any transactions in the next block, meaning you won't get any fees from it, okay? So header first mining works. And it works so long as you have a block reward. The problem with this header first mining thing is that once the block reward drops to 0, header first mining dies with it, because obviously the only benefit from mining a header is that you get the Coinbase transaction, which is the block reward, and once the Coinbase transaction or block reward drops to 0, there's no point in just getting the Coinbase transaction. So even if you assume all this math that I just showed you guys here was wrong, even if you assume that, you know, oh, we can only use 60 megabytes per second connections and we can't use graphene, even if you assume that, header first mining solves this problem. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, that's the end of this video. Hopefully some people will come out with better arguments against Bitcoin Cash. This one wasn't really all that great. At least these guys were trying, you know, but just pretty poor argument. Anyways, there will be more videos coming out soon.